Last time, we left the Menendez parole hearings at a breaking point. A glitch, or perhaps a leak, had disrupted Lyle's hearing with the sound of his brother Eric's testimony bleeding into the room. For a case already buried in sensational headlines, this was a moment straight out of a courtroom thriller. But was it a simple technical error? Or something that could unravel the board's decision? As attorneys scrambled and the parole panel pressed forward, one truth remained. The Menendez brothers' fight for freedom wasn't over. It was only beginning. Inside the Richard J. Donovan Correctional Facility, hearings are supposed to follow strict rules. Each inmate is heard separately, without cross-contamination of evidence. The law demands fairness, even for killers. So when Eric's voice cut through the speakers during Lyle's hearing, it wasn't just embarrassing. It raised questions of legality. For a moment, the panel froze. Did this mean bias had crept in? Would they have to halt proceedings? Lyle's attorneys certainly thought so. They whispered urgently, noting the disruption for the record. If necessary, they could appeal, arguing that the hearing had been tainted. But the board pressed on. After a short pause, they resumed questioning, as if nothing had happened. Still, the seed of doubt had been planted. And in a parole system built on technicalities, seeds like that can grow into opportunities. When the final denial was announced, the board listed their reasons. Number 1. Seriousness of the crime. No matter how many years had passed, Lyle and Eric's shotgun murders of their parents remained among the most shocking in California history. Number 2. Prison misconduct. Over 3 decades behind bars, the brothers had racked up rule violations. Nothing on the level of violence in recent years, but enough to signal they hadn't always been model inmates. Number 3. Lack of insight. This is parole board language for something very specific. The sense that an inmate doesn't fully understand, or hasn't fully explained, why they committed their crime. In interviews, both brothers had repeated their abuse defense. They insisted Jose Menendez was a predator, that Kitty Menendez was complicit, and that their crime had been fueled by desperation and fear. But for the parole board, those claims raised a problem. Were the brothers acknowledging responsibility? Or were they still justifying murder? The distinction was critical. And in the board's eyes, Lyle and Eric hadn't crossed the line into full acceptance of guilt. So, parole was denied. Not for 1 year, not for 2, but for 3 long years. At least, that's what the headlines said. But here's where most of the public missed the point. California law doesn't lock that 3-year denial in stone. Within 11 to 12 months, an administrative review can be requested. If approved, it can move up the next hearing to as soon as 18 months from the denial. It's a quiet process, rarely discussed on the evening news. But for inmates, it's everything. For the Menendez brothers, that meant hope wasn't extinguished. Not completely. Imagine being told, 3 years, then discovering it might be half that. This is the dramatic irony of their situation. On the outside, the world shook its head. No parole, not until 2028. Inside, their lawyers were already counting months, already eyeing the calendar for 2026. To understand the parole board's skepticism, you have to look at the Menendez brothers' prison records. 4 years, they've been housed at Richard J. Donovan, a facility that, ironically, also became home to other infamous inmates like Sirhan, the assassin of Robert F. Kennedy. Inside, Eric and Lyle have lived relatively quiet lives. They've led support groups, participated in therapy, even earned degrees. Eric became known for his writing, Lyle for his leadership in self-help programs. But there were blemishes. Rule violations that, though minor compared to violence, still counted against them. In a system where every action is logged, even small missteps weigh heavily when freedom is on the table. The Menendez case has always been more than just a courtroom drama. It's a cultural touchstone. Back in the 1990s, the trial was one of the first to be broadcast gavel to gavel on court TV. America watched, transfixed, as the brothers broke down in tears describing years of alleged sexual abuse. For some, they were liars, spoiled rich kids who slaughtered their parents for inheritance. For others, they were tragic victims, pushed past the breaking point by unspeakable trauma. Fast forward to 2023, and the Netflix Monsters series rekindled those debates for a new generation. TikTok filled with sympathy edits. Hashtags like #FreeTheMenendez Brothers trended. Public opinion shifted, slightly, but noticeably, and the parole board knew it. They weren't just ruling on 2 inmates. They were ruling under the gaze of millions. Here lies the central paradox. The parole board demands that inmates accept full responsibility, that they abandon excuses, admit guilt, and explain how they've changed. But the Menendez brothers' entire defense, their entire narrative, has always rested on the claim of abuse. It's not just their past, it's their identity. So how do you show insight without erasing your story? How do you say, "Yes, I was wrong," without betraying the very claims you've made for 35 years? This is the trap. The board wanted remorse unclouded by justification. The brothers offered remorse wrapped in trauma. And in that gap, parole was lost. But then, the glitch. The audio bleed from Eric's hearing into Lyle's. To the average viewer, it was a small technical hiccup. But legally, it could be dynamite. If Lyle's attorneys file an appeal, they could argue that his hearing wasn't conducted with impartiality. That hearing Eric's voice, even for moments, created bias in the board's mind. It wouldn't guarantee freedom. It wouldn't overturn the denial. But it could reopen the case. It could accelerate the timeline. And in a parole system defined by calendars and rules, acceleration is everything. Why does this story matter so much, even now? Because the Menendez brothers sit at the intersection of wealth, violence, and family tragedy. Their case has everything: Beverly Hills excess, whispers of abuse, cold-blooded murder, and now, decades later, the question of redemption. They're no longer the young men who strutted through courtrooms in designer suits. They're graying, middle-aged prisoners. And yet, for millions of Americans, the question lingers. Should they ever walk free? It's this unresolved tension that keeps the cameras rolling, the headlines printing, and the Netflix deals signing. But here's where it gets darker. Because beyond parole hearings and legal technicalities, there's something else at play. Something hidden in the Menendez brothers' prison files. Allegations of misconduct that haven't made as many headlines, but that the board read in cold black ink before making their decision. And as we peel back those records, one truth becomes clear. The real reason the Menendez brothers were denied parole might not be the one you've heard.